Today, we discuss Miro. Listen, when it comes to running client workshops, the dream, of course, is to get those creative juices flowing, right? But typically what ends up happening is thousands of hours get wasted because of poorly facilitated meetings. So I have Maya with me today. She's a consultant who runs Fortune 100 workshops, from leadership training to team building, and she has the insider tip on what makes things work. Maya?
Thank you, Jason. I've been doing this a long time. My number one tip is to bring everyone into that visual collaboration platform. So personally, I use Miro, and it's completely changed how I interact with the room. You have to give people a way to feel like they're in the room even when they're not. That's something you can do easily in Miro. Otherwise, they've seen the same slides and format 1,000 times.
Falling asleep, eyes glazing over, yawns, all that.
Exactly. When people follow me on the Miro board, everyone is literally going on a journey with me. We're adding thoughts, we're reacting, and we're voting for the best ideas. It's great.
Connective magic. I like it. That's MIRO.com.
Whatever kind of night you're having, start it off right with Drizzly, the go-to app for drink delivery. Whether you're mixing up a bullet bourbon old-fashioned for a cozy night in, or Kettle One Bloody Mary bar for a birthday brunch, you can get the perfect beer, wine, and spirits for any occasion delivered with Drizzly. So,
what's it gonna be?
Download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com to choose your drinks today. Must be 21 plus, not available in all locations.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 3 of Spotcast, the podcast on Star Trek Discovery and other things that we think are interesting. Well, it means a lot of things that we think are interesting. Anyway, I'm Tim Mitra, I'm in Toronto, Ontario, and I'm joined by Jaime Lopez in Seattle, Washington.
How's it going?
All right, so I see we have some follow-up here. First one was for me we've been talking over the last couple of shows, and I think even on the More Than Just Code podcast about the re-res of the original series, TOS, I've seen it called sometimes, where they've gone in and redone all the exterior shots, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Anyway, but I was poking around and I found that there actually is also a version of the Next Generation, which is your Star Trek, that has been re-resed as well. Because I noticed I was watching the Next Generation on TV the other day, and it kind of looked a little different to me, and then so went in and saw that they had in fact gone in and resed those as well, right? So
yeah, in this one, I was a little less clear. The line isn't quite as sharp. Like the original series stuff that we were talking about, I mean, it was clear that they replaced the physical model of the Enterprise, for example, with a CGI model. Okay, great. In this case, because the HDification of what would have been, a standard 4:3 standard def television signal, it was a little bit harder for me to tell. So I have seen many episodes on Netflix, and they kind of look to my eye to be from this same up-resing that you linked me to, because some of the scenes look the same. But I couldn't tell you for certain, absolute certain, that as much of it was replaced by CGI versus whatever was there before. Because it could be that, they had rather simple CGI that's expensive to do, and maybe they did it there, and it just wasn't as obvious as CGI back when you couldn't see it as well through a crisp, clear HD broadcast. Or maybe they did redo some of the effects. I actually don't know the answer to that.
Well, I think they did, and the sort of side by side comparison that I notice here, it seems to be like on the actual footage of the actors talking and stuff. I think they went in and enhanced them. But what really brought my attention to it was, and I don't know what episode I was watching. I can't even remember now. It was like just a few days ago. But so we're backing away from the starbase, and I looked at the image, and I just looked up at the screen, and as I was doing something else at the time, and it looked really good. And I thought, I don't remember them having that great graphics back then, right? And in fact, I think the example they go through here is kind of wishy-washy, because it's the very first episode where they have that sort of space, squid or whatever it was that was doing something to the planet or whatever.
This is an encounter at Farpoint, where Farpoint Station is a shape-shifting jellyfish of some sort.
Right. Yeah. Happens every week. But anyway, so that one, they kind of, and it was kind of ethereal, it's kind of wispy and whatever, and they went in and enhanced it. So I mean, like, why? But it it does sort of have that effect of looking better. So and according to this article here, it was written in 2012. They were planning to, or they had gone through and started, resampling, re-resing them and stuff like that, right? So one of my favorite films, by the way, which we haven't talked about yet, is called For All Mankind, and it's a video made by it's made up of footage by the Apollo astronauts, and it's like it follows a typical mission, if you will, but it's a mashup of all the different missions. So it's like right from Kennedy's speech at the beginning, which of course they couldn't make any better because it was filmed on like 35 millimeter or something even worse, maybe even 60 millimeter film, and it goes through all, and it's like sort of a mashup of all the different things of all the astronauts landing on the moon and driving around the moon rover right up to Gene Cernan leaving the surface and then splashing down at Earth and being picked up by the carriers and that kind of stuff, right? But what they did there was when and it's a Criterion movie, right? So I think I'm pretty sure it's Criterion Collection. So I've had that on VHS, and then I had it on DVD when it came out on DVD, and I love it and whatever, watch it over and over again, and love this. The soundtrack is by Brian Eno, an album called Apollo, which the album by itself is great too. So it's really kind of neat music. But what they did when they did the DVD copy is they actually maybe I did talk about this. They got the actual footage, the film that they have stored on ice, basically. Literally, it's frozen, right? And they took the film out and they thawed it out very carefully, and then they sent it over to the Criterion people who do they do film by frame transfers, right? So they went in, so they went to the original source of film and they thawed it out, and then they basically scanned each frame as high res as they could, and then they put the movie together, that way, right? So they kind of went painstakingly through each particular image, and that, in fact, may be what they do here in the case of like the thing at Encounter at Farpoint, where they go in and they kind of go frame by frame, and they go into Photoshop, if you will, for each particular one and enhance it as best they can, right? So the other thing about the Star Trek, the original series, is because again it was a Desilu production, they filmed that on actual film, right? It wasn't filmed on video, right? So they could actually in that case go back to the original source. I don't know if they did, but they could do the same thing. They could go back and scan frame by frame and get the best color and reproduction they could, right?
Mm-hmm. The one thing I've noticed while watching the higher res versions of TNG is that sometimes the makeup doesn't look quite as good. Like it was good enough for non-HD, for standard def. And you'll notice it sometimes on some of the creatures that they encounter, right? Some of the alien species, but even on some of the human women in this case, because the men didn't seem to really be wearing any sort of makeup from what I could tell, unless they were an alien species.
Well, they do on TV. They always, everybody wears makeup on TV, but anyway,
well, now they do, but I don't think they did back then for the standard def, because you wouldn't see it, right? It's not like your nightly newscaster who I guarantee you has to put it because they are broadcast in HD, and then they have to deal with that.
I was going to say I have a friend, and sorry to interject, but I have a friend who does hair and makeup, and she's always telling me about the kind of, because of the lighting and the kind of film that they use, or video what they use, or whatever the capture is, they do have to put something on people's faces to dull down the effect of the lights and things like that. And there's some makeups you can put on people that make them all turn red and whatever on video, but she was telling me about that. Yeah, sorry to interject there, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think my final point was I really noticed it on some of the, like Dr. Crusher in particular has some really awkward rouge effects on her that I don't recall seeing when it was standard def, and it just really stuck out as part of that sort of up-resing, and that was the one thing that had me wondering in some of these cases, like, well, did they actually redo the effect, or did they CGI? Like, what did they just clean it up so much that now I can actually see what was there, and it was just a blurry mess before?
Well, you know what I noticed is Spock's ears on the original show, because they made a prosthetic ear that they would put on him for every show, but there's always a spot just above his ear, the top part of his ear, where the ear, the pretend ear joins up with his actual real ear, and depending on the lighting and the angle, you can sometimes see a little line there, not a line like hard line, but you can see that they've put some makeup on or putty or something. That's one thing I've noticed about it when I watched the new ones, right? So the high res versions, right? And it's funny, I was watching that on the TV the other day, and on Space Channel here, they've actually on the ones on Netflix, they're not 16 by 9, they're 4 by 3, right? So, or are they? I think about it.
I think they're, well, at least the way I've been watching them on Netflix, they all seem to be 4 by 3.
4 by 3,
pillar boxed, pillar boxed. letterboxed.
Yeah, but the I noticed on Space Channel they're letterboxed, right? So they've obviously cut top and bottom on. But I was watching the one about the alternate universe that they go to where evil Spock's there and Kirk has that girlfriend and the machine that kills people. Mirror, isn't it called?
Yeah, I think that's the episode because that's where they go to the mirror universe first time.
Yeah, actually, and speaking of, before we move on, one other thing about Star Trek is I was trying to remember why I stopped watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I think what it was is I didn't like the new Doctor after Crusher got fired. Right? I don't know if you heard that she got fired, but
right for the one season 2.
Maria Muldaur or something like that. Her name was, I think.
Yeah. She was like a woman bones sort of thing.
Yeah,
that they were trying to go for.
Cranky. Yeah, sort of. Yeah, exactly.
Dr. Pulaski, that was her name. I couldn't remember.
Pulaski. Yeah. Well, she was actually in the original series too, right? Because she was one of the actresses who played in both series as well, right? She played a foil to Kirk. I think she was trying to, not the one where she takes over his body, but she had there was some sort of thing with her and Kirk, and I don't know. Just something about the actress. She was in a lot of shows back then too, right? So
yeah,
I just didn't like that Doctor. I guess I'm a sucker for redheads. I guess I don't know.
I think Dr. Crusher is a more original sort of person, and
genuine. You mean? Yeah.
Well, I mean the Pulaski. I think they really were trying for Dr. McCoy, but this time it's a woman sort of feel, and it never really felt that they fleshed her out so much. But I will caveat that by saying that Gates McFadden had 6 other seasons to do that, and so if I was to just judge season 1, it probably would be rather harshly judged too. There's kind of not a lot of characterization in general for Star Trek: The Next Generation as opposed to something like Deep Space Nine. And so I kind of wonder if my memory's a little bit clouded by the fact that Pulaski only had that one season, and not only was it one season, it was an early season before they really got their sea legs in terms of writing.
I think, and also acting. I think that a lot of the early episodes, I mean, some of them are pretty good. Surprisingly, I've gone back and watched them, and then like this one I was watching the other day, I didn't realize it was trying to figure out where it was in the story in terms of the whole arc, right? But it was actually in the first season, which I was surprised to find, right? But because it was actually, I remember it being a lot more wooden in the first series of shows, right? So so they seem to be having some fun with it. Anyway, let's move on to the next thing you've got here. You posted something in the follow up. What do you got there for us?
Yeah, this one it just came out today. The fact that James Cameron says that there's going to be another Terminator movie as a direct follow-up to Terminator 2, and Linda Hamilton and maybe her sister, I don't know, I've speculated on that part, will be returning to the Terminator franchise. As we noted that one time, she only has that one movie credit in Terminator 2 as the T-1000 version of...
Well, they can always, they can have her come back again. So I'm sorry, so follow-up to Terminator, well, Terminator 2 is in the theaters again right now, so if you hadn't seen, I never did see it in the theaters, I probably should go try and catch it, but so what was Terminator 3? Which one was that one?
That was the one with Claire Danes.
I like that one. But you're saying this one sort of fits between, is this kind of the one where they lock her up or something? I don't know. Like
it'll be interesting. So I think it might be a bit of a soft reboot of the timeline because it goes to Terminator 3 and then Salvation and then Genesis. And I don't think in general the public has been real happy with those 3. So now it's like, all right, what if we continued on from Terminator 2 and just pretend the other ones don't happen is how I
the beauty of time travel and the beauty of time travel related movies is all you do is mess with the timeline, kill a few butterflies or whatever, and you have a whole new plot line, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so you just move on to the new timeline for sure.
And Star Trek 2009 sort of does this too, right? With a soft reboot of all right, let's use time travel and time mechanisms to say we're going to make something that's kind of like what was there before, but we're going to take it in our own direction.
And we blame Spock for it because he's the one that messed up the thing with the red ball thing. I forget what it's called, the Genesis machine or whatever it's called.
Yeah, I forget what they called the red goop that they had.
Red goop, the red goop machine. Yeah, exactly. Just one drop will do it. And your next follow up here, I'm really excited about this one because this is a franchise that I really like. So what do you got there?
Yeah, this is the Tomb Raider movie, a new one, not the one starring Angelina Jolie that came out in probably the late 90s, early 2000s. This is based on the newer reboot of the series with a much younger, less experienced Lara Croft.
Oh, it's Alicia Vikander.
Right, who you might recognize from Ex Machina. Mm-hmm.
For sure. Yeah, I saw the trailer for this on Space the other day, but I didn't realize it was her. Wow, cool. Neat.
Right, Academy Award winning Alicia Vikander.
She won an Academy Award for that role?
She won it for something. I can't remember which. much,
Really?
but I definitely remember her name being called up. And so there's a little trailer there for folks to take a look at. It'll be in the show notes.
Did you know that Rona Mitra was the first Lara Croft official one?
You mean to physically represent, like as a model?
Yeah, at all the trade shows and stuff like that, Rona Mitra, yeah. But then when she fell out of favor with them because she did something bad that girls sometimes do. But that's why I'm thinking that's why they went with, and they probably went with Angelina Jolie because she's probably a bigger box office draw, right? Generally speaking.
Right.
Yeah. What do you think of those Tomb Raider movies, the two movies?
I barely remember the second one. What was it? Cradle of Life, I think was the second
Cradle
one.
of Life,
The first one I felt was a little bit more on point. Again, with the way, in the context of what was Tomb Raider like back then, right? And it was
right.
It was a phenomenon, on the PlayStation series, and the model, the 3D model was really sort of heavily based on like male fantasy sort of thing, right? So she's rather lithe, but also very top heavy, busty. Kind of has like a 90s sort of attitude that you see of, like, I don't know, Sonic the Hedgehog and Crash Bandicoot, choose anything from that time period. Whereas this one, I feel, is a lot more soft and human. And when you look at somebody like Alicia Vikander, I feel like she fits rather perfectly for that sort of role. There's probably very few other people you could see fitting into that, more realistic, semi-petite, but sort of toned, like like a cliff jumper or like a rock climber sort of body type. Maybe like a Daisy Ridley, but she's clearly wrapped up with Star Wars, so that's probably where that came into play. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So did you play the game at all?
I've not played the modern one. I've played, I don't know, 3 or 4 of the original Tomb Raider ones.
Yeah, I've played them all. I mind you, I haven't got the last one that came out on was it Rise of Tomb Raider? But I played them all, and I get to a certain point. I'm not really into, like, like even when I was playing the original game and you had to shoot the animals and stuff, like the rabid monkeys and the wolves and stuff like that. If I could avoid killing them, I would.
Right. Nowadays, people call those pacifist runs, where people will do it.
Oh, really?
Even like on Super Mario Brothers, you'd be like, all right, see if you can make it through the entire game without stomping on an enemy and without collecting a coin, which, except for a handful of levels, is like, it's actually possible for Super Mario Bros. 3. I don't know the original.
Yeah, well, it's funny. It's the other thing we used to do with Sonic the Hedgehog, and I saw something about it online the other day, was that, or on YouTube, I think, that we used to just race through the first level of Sonic the Hedgehog, see who could get there first, fastest kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. But now they do side-by-side races, and two people will I think we used to put in 2-player mode and just kind of whip through, and we didn't care how many points we got or whatever, just who could get to the end zone faster, right?
Yeah, I got to see if Sonic Mania, which just came out, I don't know, maybe like a month ago, I want to see if that's available on the Mac or not. I know it's a Steam availability, but I don't know if it's on the Mac. Probably
it's one of the things I was really disappointed by trying to play. I think I played Tomb Raider the first time around when they had that little Mac demo, but the Macs were never really good for games. I mean, like they didn't quite have the same horsepower in terms of video cards and stuff like that. So, I mean, I've always just sort of said, if you want to play games, buy like a PlayStation or an Xbox or something,
Yeah.
Because they're designed for it. Now, people are building these mega PCs and stuff to do that, right? So, you got one more follow-up item here?
Yeah. I'm fairly certain we started talking about Inhumans and probably the Defenders for Netflix.
Yeah.
And I'm about, I don't know, halfway through Defenders, I think. But the follow-on series to that, kind of continuing on the Marvel, I guess not the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but the Marvel TV Universe, is The Punisher. And we just got an official trailer for that. And boy, oh boy, does it look crazy violent, even for, like, just a trailer. I can only imagine what they actually show in the show itself.
Right. Huh.
With a little bit
ties into Daredevil as well, right?
He does have a tie to the Daredevil character. And I want to say he might have shown up, or maybe will show up in a Daredevil season. I might be getting my news crossed up a little bit there.
So is the actors that I'm just looking at, and I haven't played the thing, is this the guy that was in The Walking Dead?
I'm not a regular watcher of The Walking Dead, so I'll take your word for it.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, just based on like this one single freeze frame of this actor, it looks like our man from The Walking Dead. I may be completely wrong. I don't know. I don't know his name, but he's the one that he was Rick Grimes' partner back when they were cops before all hell broke loose, as it were. Yeah, cool. Mm-hmm. All right, so I'll check that one out. Now I got to get caught up on all that. I got to watch all the Iron Fist and Luke Cage, and get caught up. I still haven't got back to watching the Defenders. Yeah, although. So let's talk about Discovery for a bit here. So I found a link here for an interview that explains, we were talking, it's kind of follow up, I guess, too, is why the main character played by Sonequa Martin Green is called Michael. And so there's an explanation here in part 2 of an interview with the showrunner Erin Herberts, that they have a tradition in their company of having these characters with male names. Did you have an interesting article here? We'll link in the show notes. But did you have a chance to read through these 2 articles at all, Jaime?
I did, and it was kind of interesting that I didn't know that about the protagonists for Brian Fuller's shows. That as they mentioned here, many of his female protagonists have typically what you would call male names. Chuck was one, right. Jay was another, and so I guess they decided that, all right, we're going to continue that tradition, and we're going to have a woman character with a traditional male name, and they kind of settled on Michael, from what I see here, based on a couple different connections. A Michael Sneed that they used to work with, the bass player for the Bangles, and so it seems like the short answer for why they chose Michael, or more specifically, why the meta question, why they chose a traditional male name was, well, they're continuing a tradition that they've had on the show, which kind of makes me ask what's the story behind that? Maybe we'll follow up on that one point. And then a little bit of how they specifically chose Michael as opposed to, I don't know, like Ryan, for example, right? I've met women named Ryan.
Sure, yeah. Well, I know a lady named Marty, whose name is Martin, named after her grandmother, actually, whose name was also Martin. Or maybe I wonder if it's her last name. I don't know. But yeah, Marty, my friend Marty. Hey, Marty. Okay.
Sticking with the part 2, it's sort of interesting that they touch upon sort of the tradition of pushing the mainstream boundary that Star Trek is continuing with. And I don't know that having the first openly gay couple on the show as series regulars and not, I don't know, special guest stars or something, or a very special episode, that is kind of interesting. And it sort of harkens back to what they show here, where it was a big deal to have Nichelle Nichols as Uhura on the show during the 60s, when it was definitely not okay to have racial integration. So I think that's really cool that they're doing that. I'll be interested to see if it's played as sort of like how central it might be to some of what's going on there. If you look at Star Trek Beyond, they ever so quickly hint at Sulu being married to a man. It's kind of not explicitly said that that's his husband, from what I recall. It could just be like his brother and taking care of the daughter or something. But I think they kind of heavily implied, as far as they were willing to do back in, when that movie came out, 2015, I think. Right.
And of course, there's the parallel universe that we've been talking about on the show is the Orville, where they've got the 2 male characters currently working on hatching their egg, right? So yeah, and so it's kind of interesting that that Seth MacFarlane, of all people, sort of beats Star Trek to the punch in terms of this, only by a matter of a couple of weeks, because we have Discovery starting by the time this episode comes out this very week. So quite exciting. Yeah. It's funny though, it's always sort of been a common thing I find with studios in Hollywood, and maybe, I don't know if it's timing or just the way that they decide to release things, but haven't you ever noticed that there's always been, movies always happen in 2s? Like there was the one about the comet crashing to Earth, and the other movie about the comet crashing to Earth. One was called one you see all the time.
Would that be like Armageddon and Deep Impact, I think?
Yeah, right. So you see those 2, and they're different movies, but at the time they were very similar. And then there was the other one about the volcano, and there was another movie about a volcano, one with Tommy Lee Jones, and I forget what those ones were, but there's always they always come in pairs, right? So I kind of wonder if the studios are sort of doing this at the same thing, because I mean, if you look at the amount of work that's gone into the Orville, right? I mean, there's a lot. It's heavy special effects. It can't be something that they came up with in 6 months as a sort of counter to Star Trek. Well, I mean, mind you, this Star Trek Discovery was announced at least a year ago, right? They started filming probably a year ago in Toronto, right? But
possibly slightly more. I can't recall. It did get delayed a little bit, so that it might be 18 months to 2 years by now. I don't know when pre-production and when post-production type stuff would begin, but yeah, it's definitely not the sort of thing where they're coming out with this show. Okay, great. Well, we're going to make our own show too, right? Like it would have to be fairly early on that sort of decision is made. Like to your point, like is it Dante's Inferno? I think might be the one with Pierce Brosnan, and I can't remember the other one. And then of course there were two different Mars related movies.
Right. Yes. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
The one with Val Kilmer and I can't remember the names. Red Planet and was another one at the same time. Yeah.
Like Mission to Mars or something, or maybe that's a more
that was the one with Tim Robbins, I think. Tim Robbins and he's flying to Mars, and then there was Red Planet where Val Kilmer gets they get marooned on Mars kind of thing, right? At the same time, right? Yeah, I used to go to a lot of movies. I used to go to a movie once a week with my friend, and we'd often sort of pick between one or the other, which one we're going to see, and then eventually we'd go back and see the other one next week, kind of thing, Yeah, but it's sort of odd that they have these parallels, and I mean a lot of so you obviously watched the Orville as well, right? This week
I did episode
I think
2, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of funny, like you said last week, we kind of expected it to be, since it's coming from Seth MacFarlane, we expect it to be like just complete sarcastic comedy kind of thing, right? But this last episode was not that funny, if you will. Like it had sort of like funny moments, when they're trapped in a zoo and they're imprisoned and then they may never get out, and yet they're eating chocolate cake and drinking whiskey. That I suppose is supposed to be funny, but but that was an interesting episode. What did you think of that one?
Yeah, so I think I took this one a little bit better. As we mentioned last week, that I was a little bit sort of confused as to what to think because I didn't know. I was like, oh, it's going to be funnier, more like a Galaxy Quest sort of thing. And it turns out, no, it's actually more of a drama with a bit of humor in there. And so this week, I think I don't know if they either made it land better or if I just had better expectations going in, where I was like, all right, there's going to be largely more drama and there'll be some funny stuff, right? Like there's some serious stuff related to, I don't know, imposter syndrome. Could we say that, right? That the lieutenant or the chief of security, she's very inexperienced, and
right, yes,
she ends up having to take over the captainship of the Orville, and she feels not prepared for it. She feels like there's no way I'm qualified for this, and yet as part of her trying to abdicate those responsibilities, they show a very funny scene where if you just saw their heads, you'd be like, well, she's having a very serious discussion with Commander Bordas, who normally would be second in command there, the second officer, I should say, but he's indisposed right now, trying to hatch his egg, which they show him naked in a very funny, compromising position, right? And so it's an interesting blend, I think I find, with the Orville there. And I think the other note I have for this is that I think for the first episode, I say, hey, Isaac, the Commander Data, but if he's really racist character, didn't really have much to do. And in this episode, he had a lot more to do, right? He was involved with the solving of the technical solution, and ultimately they used his species status and assumptions and stereotypes about his species to their advantage when they're negotiating with the other species, who's the sort of the main players in the episode, who are themselves very elitist and racist, right? So that I thought that was kind of interesting. Gave him a little bit more to do,
right? And I have to shake my head because I didn't catch his name at first, but clearly Isaac is named after Isaac Asimov, the person who wrote all the robot novels and essentially the 3 laws of robotics, which people use in all kinds of movies now, right? So you've read the Isaac Asimov stuff, right? Have you?
I think maybe only iRobot or the iRobot.
Okay, right.
Short stories. I can't remember.
Yeah, there's some
3 of
them.
Yeah. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, there's 3. The Caves of Steel, which is about a murder investigation on Earth, and then there's Robots of Dawn, which is about an investigation of a murder on Aurora, the planet where R. Daniels hangs out, I think. And there's a 3rd one. Now I'm drawing a blank on it. Anyway, R. Daniel Ovala is one of my favorite characters. He's the main robot in that one. But yeah, it's funny that that they would name him Isaac. Obviously, it's obvious that they would name him Isaac, but it's kind of funny that he did that as well. And you're right, he did play more of a role and superiority. And it's funny how they wouldn't talk to the Alara. I think her name is Alara, because she's his pet, clearly, right? So
right,
interesting stuff. Yeah. So anything about did you watch any of those shows on Space today? The sort of previews of, we had our fan expo a couple of weeks ago, where they had all the actors in for I guess they were doing press junkets on the new show, and as well we also just had TIFF, so they may have been here for part of that as well. So they had Inigo Martin Green and and what's his name now? Lucius Malfoy. That's all I can ever think of him as. Man, he confuses me. Oh, anyway, I have another connection to him with another show that another actor actually I get him mixed up with. But yeah. So one thing I want to talk about too is I've talked about dark matter a number of times on various shows. I've talked about it with Tammy on Roundabout, and I think I mentioned it to you. And it's one of my current, like, to me it has a very Canadian feel to it, because it is shot in Canada, but it's an American production that's shot in Canada. I'm not sure if I think it's a Sci-Fi Channel but it's also shown on Netflix as well. But a very good show, very good sort of setup, if you will. Like, what it is there's 6 criminals who wake up on a ship called the Raza, and they don't remember anything, right? So they start calling each other by the number, in terms of the first one wakes up, the second one, so she becomes 1, he becomes 2, and so all the way through 6. And the first season is them sort of just figuring out what was going on, and what they can remember, what they can't remember, and that kind of stuff. So it's kind of an interesting setup from that point of view, and it's evolved and become a bit more interesting of a story. But the big story, though, is that it has just been canceled, right? And so I think Sci-Fi has decided they were not going to renew it, and so there's been all of a sudden my Twitter feed just started blowing up, because I follow Dark Matter on Twitter, and there's been a huge outcry from the fans of the show, much like when Star Trek got originally canceled back in the 60s, right? I can't remember if it got canceled. Star Trek got canceled the second season and people voted it back, or
I don't remember the exact thing, but they have nearly 3 full complete seasons of the original series. I don't actually recall the story behind that, and that was definitely a different time, right? Where what were you going to do if they canceled it? Oh well, I mean, how are you going to tell the executives at CBS that they've made a mistake? Like, write letters to the editor and convince your whole fan club? Okay, that's nice. It's not like now where you can be directly on Twitter, at CBS, like, what the heck, and have a million people retweeting the same thing. That I think it's a little bit more direct and democratic in that way. Right.
But as you can see, like, I'm not alone in my thinking that this is a great show, because a lot of people have been up in arms about it, and I mean, I didn't even got canceled, to be honest with you. Like, I found out about it through Twitter, through the campaign. One of our followers on the other podcast, More Than Just Code, had mentioned it, and I sort of pinged him. Larry Tutter, I think his name is, and I pinged him and said, "What's this all about with the Dark Matter story?" Right. So, and then he told me that, and then I kind of gathered it, and we're reading some of the tweets that had been canceled. But but apparently they're trying to get it going, so get it back online here. I don't know if it's been successful yet or whatever, or I think they were trying to get maybe Netflix or someone to put some money behind it and keep it going. But yeah, I mean, it was a good
bummer
show
when that sort of thing happens.
Yeah, I mean, they had just started in the 3rd season. They started evolving some of the characters. Even the android, who's an interesting take on an android. Even she's there's sort of like an android society, kind of similar to how Dobby, the house elf in the Harry Potter series, had a subplot that went through the books, right? The androids have sort of a subculture themselves, and they kind of have secret meetings, and they've been upgrading each other to try and get better, more life experience, have emotion, things like that, right? So, and then we met the woman who created the robots, who was frozen in some sort of sleep, like a suspended animation, because she'd come down with some disease. But it turned out she was the mirror image of the android on the Raza, right? So, spoilers, by the way, spoilers. But and that was an interesting plot line too, and it'd be interesting to see where that one went. But it's kind of interesting stuff, right? So we're finding out some of the genesis of the characters. There was one sort of plot line I really didn't like, but I'm not going to bring it up here. But yeah, just too bad to see that show go, if it goes. But because again, it's similar to Firefly, like, kind of. I think the people behind the show didn't really appreciate how far it went, and I mean, one of the things I wonder too about Netflix in general is Netflix is notorious for not sharing data about how many people watch their shows, right? And a lot of times, there's some original content on Netflix now, naturally, right? But a lot of it is reruns, old movies and old TV shows and things like that. Like Dark Matter started running on Netflix here in Canada anyway, fairly recently. And I'm not sure if all 3 seasons are up, but just the 2 seasons at least. And some of the other shows that we've talked about, Travelers and things like that, have showed up on Netflix. But it must be really tough for these guys to sort of have these products that they're putting their efforts behind. Because, one of the things that Douglas Adams talked about, and one of the reasons why he was talking about when he was doing the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, is that he was actually a TV writer in England, and his job was to put as many people in front of a TV commercial as he possibly could. Right? Mm-hmm. That's why they wrote interesting shows, not for the sake of writing an interesting show. I mean, that was part of it, but the main motivation and the reason they got paid was to put 3,000 viewers in front of this soap ad or whatever. Right? And he sort of was always resented that kind of position. Right? But now we're getting shows that aren't necessarily reliant on the commercials that run between the pauses, right? Like you get things like House of Cards, and you get things like Game of Thrones, and you get things like Dark Matter, hopefully, even Doctor Who's and things like that are more about they're actually better made shows, better stories to because people want that, people demand that right now. And then you have a vehicle like Netflix where they don't disclose how successful they are. I mean, we can only there's no sort of Nielsen rating kind of thing to or maybe there is, and people can let us know if there is, but there doesn't seem to be any way to measure how successful a product is. And I think Netflix probably just pays like a blanket amount to the producers of the show to run it, to have the right to run it. So and they must have deep pockets if they can afford things like Star Wars. Like they had Force Awakens here in Canada, and they had Rogue One, right? And you guys have Rogue One in the States now, right?
We do have Rogue One, but sadly don't have Force Awakens on Netflix.
It makes no sense.
The weirdness of rights negotiations stuff. But that's okay. Let me ask something. So, in a non-spoilery way, the end of Dark Matter, does it end on a cliffhanger?
Of course, it does.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So it ends on like a dead cliffhanger. So that's rather unfortunate. So it would be great to see that they have a wrap-up season at the very least. And I do think it is quite astute that somebody like a Netflix, or maybe an Amazon, or maybe a Hulu might be sort of the right vehicle for that, because for those, their whole strategy is different, right? I think to your point there of it's not necessarily, we got to make this so that Coca-Cola and Huggies can have millions of people watching when their products are there for the commercials. These streaming providers, they really just needed to have enough content to convince you to continue paying the $9.99 a month or whatever it is. And of course, they do have their own internal stats as to, is this thing worth it or not? But they seem to have not really just dropped stuff too much. And I think Netflix is probably the one that's done this the most, with the notable Marco Polo and Sense8 both got dropped after their second seasons for both of them.
Right.
But my understanding for those is that they were just ridiculously expensive to make. And clearly Netflix was like, all right, even we can't continue to do this. And when I look at this article, the show's creator is like, hey, the ratings during the third season of Dark Matter were consistent as opposed to generally dropping. And so it's confusing.
Right,
well,
yeah.
Maybe Sci-Fi was hoping that the third season would go up. And for them, maybe consistently the same is a failure, because they're like, look, it's costing us X amount of money per episode. We just can't justify that given the viewership, is what I'm guessing, right? And so if anything, I do think something like a Netflix would be there, because they've done stuff like bring back Arrested Development for a fourth season, right?
Right.
Years after the fact.
Oh, no, they brought it back already, you mean, right?
Yeah. So it's entirely possible. Hopefully they don't, destroy any of the sound stages or anything that have that stuff, because even though, as they mentioned here in this article, some of these actors and actresses are going to be off doing other things. I mean, you could always take a year or two off and then come back. It becomes more difficult when it's like, the main ship says we completely destroyed it, so now we'd have to rebuild it, and is it worth that startup cost again?
Well, it's the same thing with Serenity, right? When Firefly got canceled, I mean, those 6 actors or whatever, that ensemble cast, they kind of all went their separate ways, and so Nathan Fillion went off and did Castle, and what's her name? Man, we really gotta get our names together. Marina, blah blah blah. She did a few series. She was in V for a while, and I think she was the wife in Homeland, right? In the first season of Homeland, and and they kind of all go their separate ways, and it's really hard to pull them back. And so I guess the only way to bring them back is to have mad movie money, right? To sort of lure them back into a certain period of time when they could film a movie. And that's what they did with Serenity. And so, I mean, I think Dark Matter, if it does have a resurgence, if it doesn't get renewed for a fourth season, it's going to come back as a movie to kind of close all the loops, right? Because, as you said, if the six actors, I mean, like I said, the six actors are integral to the show. And one of the plot lines that I didn't like is that one of the characters, and I can't remember if it's 3 or 4, he leaves the Raza and goes off and starts to live his old life again. And he comes back in the finales, and he's very involved in the later part of the season. But I'm trying not to give too much away, right? But he's still one of the six, right? And even though they don't call him by his number anymore, but and there's some. Oh, actually, no. Actually, one of the guys got killed, but one of the characters left the show. I forgot about that now. Yeah. So of the six, right? So they had already lost one character. I guess they lost him to a better movie deal or whatever. But we'll never know until the movie comes out. But so it's kind of sad. I mean, and it's funny. Like at the same time as I was watching Dark Matter, I was also watching Killjoys, as I said before. But Killjoys is one that I think I said a couple of weeks ago that I stopped watching it because it just, the third season just kind of lost my interest. It got too complicated or too far out there in terms of where the story was going, right? So it had an interesting point at the beginning, but it didn't kind of hold my interest. Whereas Dark Matter always sort of has held my interest, right? So it's a tough thing. And you said you've watched a couple of episodes of it so far, right? But nothing really major.
Yeah, I think at least the first episode, maybe the second. Yeah, and it does seem like an interesting show. I kind of wonder now that I know that it like ends on a cliffhanger. I'm like, oh, am I going to go through 3 seasons just to be disappointed at the end? I think I might wait and see what ends up happening with season 4 here. But it's rough. Like I don't know. This didn't end on a cliffhanger, but as a comparison, the Joss Whedon show Dollhouse was something that I watched the first season, and then I think somewhere in the middle of the second season they realized there wasn't going to be a third. So the pace, there's like a time jump, and the pacing is all different as they try to wrap it up. And it's okay. Like I think it feels better than ending on a cliffhanger, but it definitely didn't feel as satisfying as if it had.
What about the Terminator TV show? Right, the
Sarah Connor Chronicles, right? With Summer Glau and Cersei Lannister's actress. I can't remember her name. Yeah. But like that one right there, like that one, the cliffhanger on that one is like, okay, you could make a whole movie out of that cliffhanger, right? So I think they probably did. That was a real lunch bag letdown when that one went away, right? Yeah. So it's one of these things about like this is the thing is I guess back in the day they used to the part of the motivation for making shows was to put bums in seats in front of commercials, right? Oh, but just on another tangent here, just I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but maybe you have. But have you not noticed that now they're doing like 3 minutes and 4 minutes worth of commercials on TV? Like I PVR a lot of shows, right? But I have to hold my finger on the fast forward button for quite a while sometimes, right? As I count the commercials that go flipping by. It wouldn't surprise me because I think for a very long time in a half-hour segment you would have had I think 21, 22 minutes of content.
Right. Yeah.
And then at some point it started dipping down towards 19 minutes, and I don't know what it is now. But that wouldn't surprise me at all, Tim, that you would have run into something like that.
Or a lot of times when you're watching a movie that's being shown on a TV channel, and the commercials are like they're 2 or 3 minutes long at the beginning of the movie, but as the movie gets closer to the conclusion of the story, they throw even more commercials in. It's ridiculous sometimes when I watch these things, right? So I think how much time there is. But and I do want to circle back to one point that we didn't talk about, and that's Galaxy Quest, and in respect to the Orville, right? And how hard like my point was that you had sort of called it a dramedy, which I hadn't really thought about last week, but now that I've seen it, this particular episode it was very sort of somber in a lot of places, right? Because it was a crisis, right, that they had to sort of resolve, and and how they get through that, and how they get to the point where obviously clearly the captain of the ship breaks with regulation and goes off and does the right thing, right? But when I was thinking about that, when you had said last week, it just reminded me, like, Galaxy Quest for me was a sleeper movie, right? Because I was in that sort of mode of going to see movies all the time, and I wasn't a huge Tim Allen fan, to be honest with you, and I like Sigourney Sigourney Weaver, and I like Alan Rickman, and and there's a couple of other guys that came out of that. The Mac guy, I've forgotten his name now, who plays the geek kid.
Right, from the I'm a PC, I'm a Mac commercials that Apple had in the 90s, right?
I can't, what's his name? Anyway, getting old. But, when you look at that movie, and I own, again, that's another DVD that I own a copy of, right? When you watch that movie from beginning to end, it holds together really, really well. Like, it was really well thought out. And part of the reason why that is because of the tie into sort of the fandom, right? Like, we touched on Star Trek initially, in terms of fan expos or Comic-Cons and that kind of stuff. And I think Star Trek was one of the first, and people can yell at me or correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was one of the first sort of conventions that they came up with, Star Trek conventions, where the fans there was so much, clamoring for stuff that they started, begging these people to come by and, meet and greet and sign autographs and, and show off, whatever paraphernalia they could. And that kind of grew up into it, merged with the Comic-Cons and grew up. And Jonathan, who's supposed to be doing our fact checking, can check in anytime now. But because he knows the history of this better than I do. But, I think the Star Trek was sort of the first ones to come along, and for them to build this idea of, and I think you mentioned before that, when they were kicking back in the 60s, like literally there's on Netflix, there's a show called I Am Spock, which was done by, Leonard Nimoy's son. And actually it's funny because there's a scene in Big Bang Theory where Sheldon is talking to Leonard Nimoy's son about the making of I Am Spock, or no, it's not called I Am Spock. It's maybe the Spock Chronicles or something like that. I've forgotten the name of it, but it's on Netflix. Look it up. I'll put a link in the show notes when I remember what it's called. But if you watch that, it's kind of like Leonard Nimoy went from gig to gig. Like he was Spock for 2.5 seasons, then he was the guy on Mission Impossible, and before that he was like in some Western, and he was in a Western with William Shatner, and it was produced by Gene Roddenberry. So that's how Gene Roddenberry got these two actors on his radar. In fact, I think they show a clip of a scene, if I'm not mistaken, where William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy are in a like a drama that's not related to Star Trek, right? But they kind of, and so back in those days, the actors, there's all these lore stories about people didn't like Shatner because he was the big star on the show and that kind of stuff, or supposedly he's more sort of more of a draw than the rest of them were, and as things evolved over time, right? Like, I don't know if you noticed, I didn't realize this, but Yeoman Rand, the woman with the blonde hair at the very beginning of the show, she was only on for like 5 or 6 episodes, and then she was let go, right? And then they brought in other people. But yeah, it's kind of, and yet she's one of these people that you go to the Star Trek convention to sort of see and meet and whatever. And yet, I don't know if she comes back later on, but she was only in the first couple of episodes, right? Maybe she was in the way of Kirk, and they had to get rid of her to let him have relationships with other women aliens, which is kind of really weird when you think about it, right? But coming back to Galaxy Quest, is such a well written story because it's about these actors, thespians, if you will, or the by Rapthar's hammer, that character, the Alan Rickman character, is really good in this one, right? Where he has to wear the rubber head and all that whole bit. But the way that they sort of portray these has-been actors who are now famous because they're doing these conventions, and then how they wrap that whole sort of those two stories together, and then the idea that the aliens who are the real aliens think that these guys are legit TV stars because that's what the aliens would have received from us in terms of what we're broadcasting away from Earth, right? So yeah, but it really does hold up well. I mean, and this show isn't about Galaxy Quest, by the way, but
no, but I think you're right. It is underrated, and I don't think it did as well at the box office as anyone would have hoped.
Oh no, it didn't.
But it's definitely picked up. I don't know. It's like a cult classic. I hesitate to call it that because it's not quite as culty as Rocky Horror Picture Show or something, but it's kind of there, right? It's kind of closer to that sort of thing. I think it does hold up well. I think it does. I feel like it's certainly influenced something like the Orville, even though the Orville is a bit more serious than it is comedy. You can feel a lot of that same sort of vibe coming from it of, hey, this is the sort of thing that Star Trek would run into. What if we showed our own take on it?
Right. So I'm glad you brought up Rocky Horror Picture Show because now I can talk about it. But because I remember my first sort of movie going experience as an independent person, as you grow up as a child and you become 10 10, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, and you start to have your own identity, right? Was my friends at school were always watching these movies like The Werewolf and Frankenstein and things like that, right? And I remember watching the first movie I watched, I think it was called Werewolf versus the Frankenstein, and I had horrible nightmares the night after I watched it, right? I remember when it was like 1975, I guess, when Rocky Horror Picture Show came out, and I remember reading the review in the newspaper about this movie, and I wanted to go see it. And I think a couple of years before that, Frankenstein 3D had come out, which was by Andy Warhol, which I have seen since. But I even got my mother to write me a note to take to the theater to say it's okay for my son to watch this movie, right? They still wouldn't let me in and watch the movie because I wasn't accompanied by an adult. But Frankenstein was restricted, and there are reasons why it was restricted, but I didn't know it at the time, right? I just thought it was a movie about Frankenstein. But I remember the Rocky Horror Picture Show and the fact that I couldn't go see it because I was underage, right? And then flash forward a couple of years, or zoom forward a couple of years, two or 3 years later, there was a theater we used to go to every Thursday night to watch movies called the Kingsway down on Bloor Street in Toronto, near Bloor and Royal York, which is where I grew up. And it's still there, right? And they had like $2 movie nights, and you could go in, you could pay $2, and they would show two movies, one after the other. And they would show one movie, and they would show a second movie, and then they would show the first movie again, right? So and back then you could go into a theater and you could just sit there and stay there until they closed the place up, right? So I by accident I got to see One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, because one time I went in, I was still underage, I was probably 17 at the time, and I remember watching the beginning of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, thinking, oh, this is the preview for the movie coming up, and then realizing, oh my God, I'm actually watching One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, right? But anyway, so I was in the Kingsway Theater watching the Rocky Horror Picture Show, years later, when people were just starting to yell at the movie and just starting to throw toast at the screen and stuff like that, right? So, when he's pouring, I assume you've seen the movie and you probably know about where I'm going with this, right? Where, when Riff Raff is pouring the wine and he doesn't lift the bottleneck up and he just goes from one glass to the other and pours it on the table, and the audience would yell, spill it, as he's doing that, right? Or people would throw bread and stuff like that. But that was just before people started dressing up to see the show, and just before it got really out of hand, where people were like having food fights and stuff like that. So before the mayhem, right? So it was kind of interesting because I was there at sort of the dawn of that, audience participation thing, but I've never actually gone to a Rocky Horror Picture Show when it's all out mayhem and whatever, and people getting up on stage and singing and stuff like that. But so Rocky Horror has a soft spot in my heart as far as movies go. And actually, this Comic-Con, they had everybody who's alive. No, sorry, they didn't have everybody. Susan Sarandon didn't come, but they had everybody from the original movie was here for our fan expo. So Barry Boswick, who played Brad, and Tim Curry, who played Frankenfurter, Magenta, and Columbia. I remembered her name this time, Columbia. And Meatloaf was here too, right? Signing autographs and stuff like that too. So it was kind of an interesting thing. But yeah, Rocky Horror Picture Show. Love it. Thumbs up. That's my bit about Rocky Horror. I could sing all the songs on guitar if you like to, if you're ever interested.
Maybe that can be after show content.
Yeah, well, here's a little tidbit for you. The song "Hey Joe" by Jimi Hendrix. Mm-hmm. It's the same as the Time Warp.
Oh, really? I never thought about it.
Same chord progression, yeah. Yep. So I used to always annoy my bandmates by changing the song we were singing by singing a different song over top of what they thought we were playing, right? Like, "Sympathy for the Devil" by the Rolling Stones is, I think it's a song by the Alban Brothers, "Can't You See," which is what that woman's been doing to me. What's that one called? Man, I can't remember. Anyway. More than just code, as we like to say on the other show.
Yeah, it definitely blows your mind when you realize those sorts of things. Yeah,
it's all connected. It's all conspiracy. It's all a conspiracy. It never happened. All right, so what else we got to talk? So I think I threw up a thing here about we do picks on the other show, but I think these are things that we're looking forward to seeing, notwithstanding Discovery, of course. But I just found out, and this is what I'm watching Space, that they're doing a new Philip K. Dick series starting in November called Electric Dreams, and it's sort of kind of like Twilight Zone in that they're doing different episodes with different great actors. So they're going through all the short stories, or most of the short stories of Philip K. Dick. I don't know if you know this or not, but like things like Minority Report. What else did he do? Anyway, things like Minority Report were actually short stories. They weren't fully fleshed out movies, right? So
yeah, I vaguely knew that about Minority Report. It sounded real familiar, and I have heard that there are other movies movies that were and media that are based on some of those short stories.
Yeah. See. There was one that was an animated one they did with John Cusack. No, with that other guy. What's his name? You know that guy with the name.
Does he look like John Cusack?
No. Yeah. Keanu Reeves.
Is that why it came?
Keanu Reeves. Yeah. Canadian
okay.
Keanu Reeves. Yeah. So Electric Dreams. Oh, Man in High Castle was one of his stories too. How about that? Minority Report. What else is there? Why is Blade Runner on here? What? Philip K. Dick. I'm just trying to think. Oh, Scanner Darkly. That's the one I'm thinking of. You know that movie? Yeah. So why would they have him, Blade Runner, listed under Philip K. Dick? That makes no sense. Oh, Total Recall. That was his as well. And The Adjustment Bureau. Those are all short stories by him. Why would they have him? Oh yeah, no. It's right. Duh. He did do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, which is the movie the story that Blade Runner was made out of. Yeah. So it all comes around full circle. How about that? How do you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. So what is this here about the new series, November 12th?
Yeah, this is called Electric Dreams, and like for instance, they're doing 10 episodes. Looks like here. I'm just looking on IMDb. They're having people like I was reading an article real quick here. Bryan Cranston's in it. In one of them, I've got a link here. I'll put in the show notes as well. So yeah, you've seen Black Mirror too, right? Have you?
Not all of the seasons, I think.
Right.
I barely started season 3.
Yeah. No, I think I saw season 3 before I went back and saw the rest earlier. But yeah, similar idea. Like every story is slightly different than. Every story is different. But they're all based on the one thing in common is that they have that going for them. So these are all short stories by Philip K. Dick and Electric Dreams coming up in November. I guess on Sci-Fi or whatever it is you guys have in the States there, right?
Right. We do have Sci-Fi. I guess it's Space Channel for.
Yeah. Well, I think we talked about this a while ago, and this was on More Than Just Code, but how TV shows are bought by networks. We don't have the same networks as you do. Like we don't have Showtime. We don't have Sci-Fi. We have HBO. We have. Do you have FX? Is there a station called FX in
We do have FX. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So NFXX, which is the second version of it. So those are common. So Sons of Anarchy would have been on FX. Louis C.K.'s TV show Louis is on FX. And anyway, so Space is a network. It's a network owned by one of our conglomerates here, which is now all owned by Rogers. Rogers went out and bought everybody a couple of years ago. So Rogers and one of the big networks, CTV, I think they either own each other or they split the shares or whatever. So things got split up into different groups. So those people they have buyers who go to these shows in Vegas or wherever Hollywood or whatever, and they pay for the rights to broadcast those shows on their channels, right? So Space and Sci-Fi tend to have a lot of things in common in terms of what shows get shown. Even our Netflix is different than your Netflix, and it all has to do with broadcast rights and things like that, right? So, when they buy, so we don't necessarily I guess we're not comparable. Like I think Sci-Fi puts money behind shows, but then our Space or our Showtime. No, what do we have? We have Showcase. Showcase will show Sci-Fi shows like that, right? So, anything else you want to close with there, Jaime?
Yeah, I really don't have a pick of anything that I want to see. Like everything I would want to see is further away. Like I'm interested in that Tomb Raider movie. I'm interested in that Terminator bit and other bits. I think I'm going to default to just really being excited about wanting to see Star Trek Discovery. The Inner Space website videos that you sent me, I think they really got me sort of re-jazzed about it. Yeah. I was like, this looks like it'll be fun. Kind of an interesting, different take on Star Trek.
Yeah. Oh, of course, my second pick is Blade Runner 2049, which I'm looking. Blade Runner is another one of those movies like probably Tomb Raider or Raiders of the Lost Ark and Star Wars. Movies that I can anytime they're on, I can watch them. Here in Canada on New Year's Eve, they used to drop the ball or whatever, and then every January 1st for 10 years or so, they would show Blade Runner. And I have several copies of it. Like I actually had the Laserdisc version where they have the talking over top of Harrison Ford's character narrates over top because the movie people thought that it was too out there. But I was actually watching Blade Runner last night, as a matter of fact, on iTunes and watching the version I bought for the kids. It's a beautiful movie. Like, when you look at like how it's the cinematography of that movie is just great. Like almost every shot you could freeze frame, make it as a wallpaper on your desktop, and away you go. Right. So there's a lot of a lot of twisty bits in it, so I'm I guess in the same way that I'm kind of dreading what Discovery will be, Star Trek Discovery, right? I'm being prepared to be let down because I can't imagine, even though it is Ridley Scott who's doing Blade Runner 2040. No, it's not actually, right? Because he did the original Blade Runner, didn't he, Ridley Scott?
I think he did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, so I'm kind of like, it's like the redo of Tron, right? Like, you saw the redo of Tron, right?
Yeah, Tron. Well, do you mean Tron Legacy? Do you mean the sequel?
Tron Legacy, yeah. Did you see the original Tron when you were a kid, or?
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen it, but I definitely saw it as a kid.
So what did you think about Tron Legacy? I mean, it was a great looking, wonderful looking movie, but what did you think about it overall?
I think it was fun at the time, but I find that it doesn't hold up as well as it did back in, 2010, 2012, whenever that came out. I don't find myself seeking it out.
No, yeah.
All right, so for Star Trek here, let me help you out a little bit, Tim, because I understand your consternation, and I think there will be many folks out there who are a little bit worried, because it's been a while since we've had Star Trek on TV, and it's certainly been a while since we've had good Star Trek on TV, if folks think about it that way. And so I think, one, do it something that I tend to do with anything that's new. Give it, just kind of ignore the first episode or two, right? Like, I mean, you have to absorb them, and they're setting the stage, but they're really trying to get you up to speed with what's going on, what's the context. And it's really more episode 3 and beyond that you should be able to say, all right, I either do like this show and want to continue watching, or no way, I'm not going to bother with this.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say, because I really liked Enterprise, right? I really, really liked first season of Enterprise, second season of Enterprise, and then one of the Bushes went down into, Iraq or Iran, or I think Saddam Hussein lit all the oil on fire, and, all that nonsense happened. And all of a sudden going to war was like the big, mental sort of thing that, as an outsider, that's kind of sort of what I kind of saw in our current history at the time, right? And all of a sudden Star Trek Enterprise, I think they kind of, maybe the ratings were slipping, or they felt they weren't getting the traction they really wanted. So they went into this whole war mode, right? With this war with the other alien race that had the 3 different types of races, or I forget what they're called, but
right, the Xindi.
Xindi, yeah. And that kind of ruined it for me, because I mean, like, why, like, for all that, when you think about, the original Star Trek was sort of had this sort of mandate of going around and just exploring, and their one world prime directive, right, where they can't interfere with other societies that are less advanced or don't have technologies and stuff like that. They're kind of really pussyfoot around, trying to influence those other societies, right? And they had that sort of whole holistic, ironically, in retrospect, it was spreading the American way throughout the galaxy. But let's take that back a step, right? The intent was good in Gene Roddenberry's original intent of going around and exploring these other places and trying to learn about them, but not really, observe them, but not really, like Heisenberg, not really having any effect on them and that kind of stuff, right? So that was good. But an Enterprise kind of started off that way, because it kind of picked up where First Contact left off, which again, First Contact is probably my favorite Star Trek movie. Sorry, I gotta stop saying that. My favorite Star Trek movie. And then just for perspective with listeners of this show, I know people tend to be either Star Trek followers or Trekkies, or they end up being Star Wars followers, and there's a divide between the two. I blur them all together. I like both Star Trek and Star Wars. But anyway, so that's why I have these Freudian slips all the time. I'll say one when I mean the other. Anyway, like, I was really disappointed when they went to war. I felt that was not necessary, right, in terms of where the story was going. Like, Archer had his dog on the ship, and they had this crazy Vulcan lady, and you had Trip, who had this relationship with the crazy Vulcan lady, which was reminiscent of Deanna on Voyager, right? That kind of stuff, right? So the going to war thing kind of really turned me off Enterprise, right? Like, I watched it, but I watched it without the same enthusiasm that I watched the first 2 seasons, right? I don't know how you felt about it. Like, what did you think about Enterprise in that sense?
I never really got that attached to Enterprise. It never really clicked for me as a series. series. But what I think I'm hearing is the analogy to, let me think about the timing here.
It was right during Gulf War. I'm pretty sure it was during the Gulf War, or during, maybe not Gulf War. It was,
I think it was after 9/11.
It was after 9/11. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it definitely had a storyline for those seasons that ended up with like a clear analogy to going to Afghanistan and going to Iraq. And I don't know. Again, it's kind of tough because I wasn't really into Enterprise that much. Just like I don't think I was like as much into Voyager. In terms of Trek being an analogy for the real world, it sort of always had that, right? Like the Klingons were representative of the Cold War between the United States and Soviet Russia, and there were analogies to there were race integration based metaphors going on. I think the one we brought up before is the guys who are like half black, half white on their face, and they're really racist against each other.
Can't you tell the difference?
One is left and one is right, and the other is right and the other's left. Yeah, right. And so I think when I look through it through that lens, as long as it's not like too obvious, like like they're hitting you with their elbow, right? It's like do you get it? That's who that's representing. Did you just see that on CNN this week? That's exactly who we're talking about. I think I like it better the way the original series did it, where if you did a critical analysis, you would, sort of like an English literature sort of paper, you would say, oh, well, this is what this represents. When it's beating you over the head with it, which I think Enterprise did at times during that series, I think that's where it ends up being kind of off-putting.
Yeah, Enterprise, what happened on Enterprise was, now that I remember, is the Xindi attacked Earth and like tore a strip out of half of Nebraska or whatever. Wherever Trip was from, his sister got killed, and he saw blood in his eyes and that kind of stuff, right? So that was the sort of, so it was like, it was parallel to 9/11 in that the Xindi kind of, just for no reason, attacked Earth and carved a big notch in the middle of it, right? And that's why, the Enterprise and the whole Federation had to jump and go off and fight this war, which kind of made no sense in retrospect when you go back and look at the original series, because there was no, they had the General Green who had the genocide thing, but they didn't have anybody. There was no mention of this big conflagration or giant war that they had at one point with the Xindi, right? So it was unnecessary, but I mean, I guess necessary at the time because that's what people were thinking. But and they needed, I guess, you need to see somebody kick some ass, right? But for it kind of ruined the show for me, and I think it ruined the show in general, and that's probably why it ended up getting canceled, right?
Yeah, we'll see where Discovery goes, because now Discovery is coming out in an era in which there are no real clear enemies, at least in terms of...
Well, they could have this crazy admiral that gets in charge of Federation and starts, making all these really crazy proclamations, right? You never know.
Right. And I think, to our point, that's okay. They could do that sort of thing. It certainly would fit with a little bit more of the, there's shades of gray in the world sort of thing.
Right, yeah.
As long as they don't oh, look, this is like an orange-skinned alien or something that took over. It's like, all right, come on, guys. You're beating us over the head on this one. And, you can show that sort of thing, and it's fine, especially when we're in an era which there's, with the exception of something, like terrorist groups or something, there really aren't any clear, or many clear enemies, right? This isn't 1960s where the Soviets are the clear enemy of the United States. There's this weird relationship right now between the United States and Russia and China and just about everybody in the world, where it's everybody has to work together or collaborate or even just international global commerce has made these ties a whole lot more difficult. And I wonder if Discovery will bear out some of that, where something like TNG sort of touches on this a little bit. And I think possibly because around that time is when the fall of the Berlin Wall happens, right? When the Soviet Empire or the Soviet Union becomes dissolved, where there are cases where in the Next Generation's The Wounded episode, where the Enterprise is caught in the middle between this guy who lost a lot during a war with the Cardassians, and now he's convinced that they're doing something wrong, and so he's preemptively attacking them. And spoilers for that episode, it turns out that he was right. The Cardassians are doing something sleazy, but Picard has no choice but to say, look, we have a treaty, you have to stop. And yet he lets the Cardassians know, we know what you were we're doing. And the reason I'm not pushing this is because it's for the greater good that we let this die, that we not start a war between our people.
So were the Kardashians on Kardashians?
What do they call again? Keeping up with Kim and Kourtney Kardashian.
Yeah, were the Kardashians part of Deep Space Nine first, or were they part of the Next Generation first?
The Next Generation first, but heavily fleshed out during Deep Space Nine, to the point where they feel like a Deep Space Nine original character. Very similar to the Ferengi, who started out life as sort of a so-so species on the Next Generation and become much more interesting on Deep Space Nine.
Right, yeah. And the reunification with Spock, that was part of the Next Generation? I forget now.
Yes, that was part of Next Generation. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, that was, I like that whole timeline where Spock came back and tried to reunify with the Romulans, right? All right. Anyway, we got to get on to our next podcast. So let's wrap up this one. And so, Jaime, if people want to get hold of you on the interwebs, where would they look?
I'm on Twitter as @DevWithAHair.
All right. And as I said at the top of the show, I am Timitra, Timmitra, and we will see you guys next week, where we'll be talking about Discovery. By the way, did you notice that the shuttle that I put on the image of on the website, which you did find the website this time, didn't you, Jaime?
I did. That would be spockcast.com, and that will be in the outro as well, in case you missed it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we haven't said goodbye yet, but I didn't even think about it when I put the shuttle into the show, because we were talking about the shuttle for some reason, but that is the shuttle that I saw at Dulles Airport, which is where the Smithsonian has the Air and Space Museum. That is Discovery, ironically enough.
That is very cool. Yeah, I was going to ask you, I was like, well, it's okay if it's the Endeavour, but it's way cooler if it's the Discovery. And of course, it can't be sadly can't be the Columbia or the Challenger, but depending how old that photo was. So I figured it was the Discovery. Yeah, that's a really cool Easter egg.
For sure. All right. Okay, well, we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Goodbye.
If you want to find out more about the podcast or see episode show notes, visit the Spockcast website at spockcast.com. You can get in touch with us on the website or follow us on Twitter at Spockcast. If you have feedback or questions, send us a tweet with the hashtag AskSpockcast. If you like the show, please consider recommending us to a friend, writing a review on iTunes, or pledging any amount on patreon.com/Spockcast. You can find out details on how to help us out on our website at Spockcast/sponsor us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the future. Now that you guys have pointed out this, what's that word called that they use for Slack? That
they use Electron underneath the covers.
Electron, yeah. What a piece of crap! I wondered why all of a sudden I wasn't able to add photos in the app, because it only gives me like the last 20 images or so that I've taken, whereas I'm used to being able to add anything I want, right? Mm-hmm. So hang on, I'm just going to answer this call.
I mean, that's more of a product decision than anything. I don't think that's a distinct limitation that Adam has, from what I can recall. But
it doesn't seem to have very good photo integration, or at least if that's what they think. Like, you're only interested in finding like an image and uploading it from like a few minutes ago,
right?
I like to go and like I keep images and I like to use them at appropriate times, right? So I don't know, just I just don't get how hard it is to find things on iOS, in general. And then when you get people make an app like that, or an app decision like that, it's so bad, like, what if I wanted to go and grab an image from like a year ago, right, and post it and send it to you, right?
Oh wait, this is on iOS?
On iOS, yeah.
It's kind of non-obvious. So when you hit let me try to do this live. 1 sec. Okay.
I'm gonna work with you on this one too.
Okay, so when you hit the image icon, and then you see there's like an image of a camera and an image of, like, I don't know, looks like a keypad, like a grid of squares.
Oh, hang on. So I click on the little image icon, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then you hit the grid of squares. Looks like a number pad.
Oh, I see. Right.
That will bring up the everything list.
Oh,
but
really?
But
okay.
it's so minimal and kind of non-intuitive I mean, the camera is obvious, right? Like, camera brings up a camera. Okay, good job on that one. But the grid of things, I thought it was like a thumb scroller thing to move things out of the way until I accidentally tapped it once. I was like, wait, what? That brings up the camera roll? It's like, whose genius idea was that? That's a terrible design.
Yeah.
So it has the feature you want. Just it might as well not have it because it was not intuitive.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's yeah. You know, I didn't even notice the. I've been using this app for so long. I don't know why they went to that sort of short list. I guess it makes sense, right? But anyway,
like the short list makes sense because I imagine there's probably like a 9 times out of 10 you're using a photo that you just took, sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
And they left the ability for you to get other things too. They just, I don't know, the designer just really messed up. I mean, they failed, right? Like that's the sort of thing that you would get in a design school and they'd be like, no, this is an F, you know?
Yeah. Near miss. It's a near miss.
Not even near miss. It was like, you didn't even get close. It's like, you know, aim for the stars and you'll hit the moon sort of thing. It's like you aimed straight into the ground, right? You don't get credit for this one.
Interesting. Sorry, I had my finger on mute again. You see the picture I just posted of the Google section at the new Best Buy downtown?
I have seen Google. No, you know what? I'm taking it back. It's probably Samsung sections. I don't think I've seen a Google section per se, and certainly not one as interesting like this.
Elaborate, yeah. I went over to look at the Google Home devices, right? And that's why I sort of saw this. And if you zoom in on the picture, you'll see the Apple logo way in the back there. Like they just got this lame, you know, typical. It's just like a table with a couple of products on it, and a guy with a black T-shirt walking around, you know.
Yeah, I think Best Buy has sort of leaned really hard into the whole showroom idea, where they'll have a Samsung section, a Microsoft section, an Apple section, I guess now a Google section. I have seen an Amazon section, and I don't know, let's call it the Facebook section, but it's really like the Oculus Rift section, where they have like actual people there to demonstrate it for you and that sort of thing. So I guess that's probably their best way to combat something like Amazon.
Yeah, we don't have some. Yeah, I guess we don't have something fancy like that here, like the Oculus Rift. But it's funny, this particular store this is the one right down at Yonge and or Bay and Dundas, which is like right downtown, right, near the big shopping mall, the Eaton Center, and they've revamped it. I mean, it used to have all these. It used to be really hard to find things. Well, it's still kind of hard to find things, but they've made it light and airy now, and except for this one section here where the Google thing is, right? And they moved all the customer service and cash register stuff to the front of the building, right? So because they used to have to go into the store to get to customer service, but they moved all that out, and they've got rid of all the sort of, you know, last minute, you know, they used to stuff a bunch of stuff near the cash registers. So as you're waiting in line, you might pick up that copy of Billy Madison or something like that, or that you've been wanting but you forgot to find in the video section, right? The other interesting thing too is like there was only 2 racks of any DVDs. It was all like, you know, stuff that's just current, right? And all the sort of the CDs went away like 2 years ago, you know, music CDs, and now all the movies have gone away. So I think we're moving towards digital selections, right?
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. So that you would probably only want to buy Blu-rays and DVDs for things that are just came out. Like, I don't know, Wonder Woman, for example, probably just came out since it just came out on iTunes. Are you really going to buy original Ghostbusters, not the 2016, but the 1984 version? I mean, do they really need to stock that anymore? Probably not, right? Like, you'll just stream it on Netflix or Amazon or something.
Yeah, it's funny, like, you know, like, I've always sort of been like the person that would buy a video or buy a Blu-ray box set or something like that, right? Like, I just got the Thunderbirds kit, which is something I watched when I was like 6 years old, you know, the Thunderbird complete series, right? But, like, you know, I own a copy of Star Trek, the new Star Trek, the J.J. Abrams reboot, and I own a copy of, you know, Beyond and the last one that just came out, right? I think that's Beyond, right? And, you know, I own Rogue One, I own Force Awakens and that kind of stuff. And yet, look, I just flip on Netflix and they're right there, right? So I'm kind of getting to the point where I'm sort of thinking, like, why even bother buying any discs at all? Because, you know, you can either, if you really, really, really want it, you can get it on iTunes, right? But if you just flip on Netflix or Amazon or whatever, it's right there for you to watch, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of what they're selling you, right? And it's true. And certainly I've fallen into that bit where I'm like, yeah, I really don't rent or buy DVDs anymore. I just stream stuff. The unfortunate thing, I think, as we talked briefly about with regards to what Disney's doing, where they're going to start their own streaming service and they're no longer going to continue their contract once it ends with Netflix. At the very least, when you have that disc, as much of a inconvenient hassle as it is, Tim, like, at least you always have that, right? And as long as you have some sort of means by which you can play it, or at least transfer it to some other medium that you can play from, from. You'll never lose that. It's never like, oh no, I lost all my Star Wars stuff. You know, it's like, oops, I guess I can't watch Rogue One on Netflix anymore. It's like, well, I have it right here, and maybe I'll have to, you know, go to Fry's and buy a $20 DVD, you know, ripper or something so I can get it onto my Apple TV or something. But at least you have an option.
Well, sadly, you know, we had to move all of our sort of valuables out of the house a couple of years ago. In, you know, when we had to get our house superheated to get rid of some bed bug issues, right? But as you might recall, so I moved all my Blu-rays and all that kind of stuff out of the house, and so the kids were over one day, and my two nephews were here at the time, and the grandkids came over, and we're discussing like their ages and range from 12 to 15, right? And you know, they're all, you know, I think of them as young kids, and you know, they kind of what kind of, they both have different, you know, filters in terms of what their parents will let them watch in terms of videos and stuff. And I just sort of said, hey, have you guys ever seen Blade Runner? And they went, no, because we were talking about Blade Runner 2049 coming out, right? And I said, have you ever seen the original movie? And they're like, no. So I said, oh, well, you know, I must have a copy of it here around here somewhere. But then I thought it was off in the garage in storage, which would take me like a month to get to. So I went on to iTunes and I bought a copy of it. And then it turned out that I just have a couple of, you know, a handful of movies underneath my TV here in a cupboard that I never opened. And sure enough, there was a copy of Blade Runner in there, right? So it's funny, like Blade Runner is one of the movies I own like several copies of, and then same thing with like all the Star Wars movies, like the original three, the trilogy. I probably own. I have those on VHS, and I have them on, you know, DVD. I have them on Chinese bootleg DVDs made from the laser discs, you know. And then I have umpteen copies, and of course I've got the new Blu-ray set that they came up with a couple of years ago, right? So plus I have that one I was telling you about, where the original uncut version, right? So
right.
Actually, yeah. So I just want to talk about that one. I didn't really finish my point last week. Was so they came out when I you know, went into Star Wars. I was getting everything Star Wars related, and I used to buy comic books. I'm not a huge comic book reader now, but you know, I used to buy, like, you know, with my allowance or whatever, I'd buy a comic book or a chocolate bar. I can't, you know, I'd flip back and forth between. And I remember buying the Star Wars comic book when it first came out and being really bummed that it was like, you know, the first hint of the story. I think it kind of went up to like Mos Eisley spaceport, you know, and the scene with the cantina bar, right? And then it was like, oh, continued next issue. I'm like, oh man. Anyway, so they reissued that particular comic book in a box with a DVD that had the director's cut of Star Wars, but it also had this original cut, you know, the original. That's how I ended up getting a copy of this on DVD, right? And at the time there was also Return of the Jedi and Empire Strikes Back in that same format. So presumably they had the original cuts of those two movies on the Blu-rays as well. But and I've seen them on Amazon, but I've never really, or not Amazon, eBay, but I've never gone and actually bought them. But that's how I ended up getting the original uncut version of Star Wars, right? Untouched by George Lucas since he made it, kind of thing.